You wake up, check your bank balance, and nothing looks dramatically wrong. Your salary has been deposited, your bills are paid on time, and on paper, your income is slightly higher than it was last year. Yet the truth is much less comforting. In 2026, many middle-class households are effectively about $1,300 poorer than they were in 2025, not because of one financial mistake or one sudden emergency, but because money is now leaking out through a system of small, almost invisible shifts, the kind you barely notice week to week, but absolutely feel by the end of the month, when there is that quiet gap that never seems to close, and the sense that something is slipping away without any single obvious cause. That is what makes this kind of financial decline so hard to confront, because it does not arrive like a crisis, it arrives like a pattern. One extra charge here, one slightly larger bill there, one renewal price that looked small enough to ignore, and then suddenly the year ends and your money seems to have lost part of its force. You are still working, still earning, still budgeting, still doing what responsible adults are told to do, and yet the results feel weaker than they used to. This is the central middle-class frustration of 2026, not that people have stopped trying, but that effort itself is buying less stability than it did before. The easy explanation would be inflation, and inflation is certainly part of the story, but that word has become so overused that it often hides more than it reveals. Most people hear a national inflation figure and assume that number describes their life, when in reality, the inflation that matters is personal inflation, the version that shows up in the categories you cannot avoid. Housing does not ask for your permission before rising. Insurance companies do not pause because your raise was small. Food prices do not care that you chose store brands instead of name brands. Healthcare costs do not politely stay flat just because you already feel stretched. The official number may sound moderate, but the lived experience of the middle class is usually harsher because the categories rising fastest are often the categories that are least flexible. To see where the $1,300 really goes, imagine a normal household budget. Not a lavish one, not a reckless one, just an ordinary middle-class budget in the United States, Canada, or the UK, where a family is paying for housing, groceries, transportation, utilities, insurance, basic healthcare, phone bills, internet, a few subscriptions, and modest discretionary spending. Now, imagine that none of these categories become dramatically more expensive overnight, but nearly all of them become slightly more expensive over the course of a year. Rent goes up by a few percent, or the mortgage stays the same while property taxes and maintenance rise. Car insurance climbs, groceries edge upward, electricity fluctuates but trends higher. Streaming services quietly add another dollar or two. Eating out becomes expensive enough that even convenience begins to feel like a luxury. Each change looks survivable on its own, but together they begin to reshape the entire structure of a household budget. This is the first trap, and it is a mathematical one. People are trained to react to large expenses, but not to accumulations of small ones. A $5 increase rarely triggers serious reflection. A $12 increase feels annoying but manageable. A $40 premium adjustment is easy to rationalize. Yet when those increases are spread across 10 or 15 categories, the total annual effect becomes meaningful. This is how a family loses $1,000 without ever feeling a single moment dramatic enough to sound an alarm. The loss is real, but it is disguised inside normal life. Let us break that down more concretely. Suppose a middle-class household spends around $4,000 per month across all essential and semi-essential categories. That is $48,000 per year, which is not extravagant in many urban and suburban regions. Now assume that the weighted increase across that budget is only 2.7%. That sounds almost modest, almost harmless. But 2.7% of $48,000 is roughly $1,296. There is your missing $1,300. No market crash was required. No luxury spending spree was required. No irresponsible behavior was required. Just a modest increase across the surface of ordinary life. And this is where many people become psychologically confused because they remember getting a raise. They remember hearing that wages were rising. They remember doing what they were supposed to do, showing up, working harder, improving skills, taking on more responsibility, and receiving a salary increase that looked respectable when written as a percentage. But salary growth is often nominal, not real. Nominal means the number on the paycheck is bigger. Real means your purchasing power has actually improved after taxes, deductions, and the changing cost of living. Those are not the same thing. A 3% raise can feel encouraging until housing, food, insurance, and transportation rise by more than that in the places where you actually live and spend. The number grows, but the life it can buy shrinks. This is one of the reasons middle-class decline often feels emotionally disorienting rather than financially dramatic. People think decline should be obvious. They expect it to look like unemployment, debt collectors, or a maxed-out credit card. But for a large part of the middle class, decline looks more subtle than that. It looks like delaying a vacation you could have taken 2 years ago. It looks like driving the same car longer because replacing it no longer makes sense. It looks like saying no to a child's activity not because it is impossible, but because it adds strain. It looks like saving less this year than last year while technically earning more. It looks like living in a state of low-grade economic caution that slowly becomes your normal. Then there is the second trap, which is psychological rather than purely mathematical, and that is lifestyle absorption. This is often called lifestyle inflation, but that term can sound judgmental, as if people are mindlessly upgrading everything out of vanity. In reality, most lifestyle absorption is much more ordinary. It is the app that saves time when life feels busy. It is the slightly better grocery choice because you are exhausted. It is replacing something worn out with the version that now simply costs more than it used to. It is a child getting older and becoming naturally more expensive. It is a family that adds convenience where it can, because modern work leaves little spare energy. The point is not that people are becoming foolish. The point is that modern life quietly encourages spending patterns that feel reasonable in isolation and cumulative in hindsight. What makes this more difficult is that the middle class is now surrounded by highly optimized systems designed to convert convenience into recurring cost. Businesses no longer rely only on one-time purchases. They rely on subscriptions, renewals, service tiers, monthly plans, maintenance packages, app bundles, delivery memberships, and automatic price adjustments. The old economy asked you to spend in visible moments. The new economy asks you to consent once and then forget. That design matters. It turns spending into background noise, and background noise is where financial leakage becomes hardest to detect. This is why so many households feel that they are doing fine on paper and struggling in practice. Their budget is not being destroyed by one obvious enemy. It is being weakened by a series of systems that are individually rational and collectively exhausting. The bank balance looks acceptable after payday, but the gap appears later, not because of recklessness, but because the modern cost structure is built to collect from the middle repeatedly, quietly, and continuously. And that is the deeper problem. The missing $1,300 is not just about one bad habit, one careless decision, or one dramatic event. It is the result of a system that applies pressure quietly, repeatedly, and often invisibly through rising fixed costs, recurring charges, and small increases that feel harmless on their own, but powerful over time. That is why so many middle-class households feel confused by their own finances. On paper, they may be earning more. In practice, their purchasing power feels weaker. The headlines may sound stable, but everyday life still feels tighter because the real squeeze happens inside the categories people cannot easily escape. And that is the real meaning of the missing $1,300. It is not just a number, it is a signal. A signal that the pressure is real, measurable, and structural. A signal that the problem is not always recklessness. Often, it is erosion hidden inside routine. The important shift is to stop treating that erosion as a personal mystery and start seeing it as a system. Instead of asking, "Why am I bad at money?" the better question is, What is happening to my purchasing power? Because once you start measuring the pattern clearly, the pressure stops feeling random. So yes, in 2026, the middle class may be about $1,300 poorer, but the bigger story is not the number alone. The bigger story is that modern financial pressure no longer arrives as one obvious emergency. It arrives through routine, through convenience, through recurring costs, and through small annual increases that quietly reshape an ordinary life. And once you recognize that pattern, you stop seeing the strain as a personal failure and start seeing it for what it really is.